unaccountable, unelected, and has no basis in democracy at all. It's closer to the Chinese Communist Party, frankly, than than a democratic Western country. So what we're seeing is, and yes, I agree, nation states who are part of the EU are allowing this to happen, and
This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 171 for the 8th of February 2024. Kevin and myself always appreciate feedback from listeners and we try to reply when we can, but Aengus Ryan sent in a sound file, which is great because I can include it in the podcast.
My question is about Irish unification and the possibility that it gets approved by the majority in the north and south. So the first bit, if it does get the go ahead, what are the terms of the British pulling out of Northern Ireland? Have they been set out anywhere, or will they agree to leave in 5 years, 10 years, 100 years? Has this been addressed anywhere?
I think this is an important question, and I think that some people are thinking about it, but not enough. In particular, I'd say that unionists are not thinking about it, which might be a bit of avoiding thinking about something they hope never happens, a bit like whistling past the graveyard. But we should look at the mote in our own eyes first, because we really aren't thinking about this. We aren't preparing either. One reason for this is that it might seem like a remote possibility, but that strikes me as making the Brexit mistake, not preparing for a possible outcome that could well happen much faster than we expect. And if that snowball starts rolling, it'll be very hard to make detailed preparations in the heat of a debate that it would bring. Jim O'Callaghan, the Fianna Fáil TD, and I think leadership hopeful, to be fair to him, he has made some proposals. I think the proposals are terrible, such as having the Dáil sit in Dublin and the Seanad in Belfast, but bad as it is, it's helpful for him to bring this up because at least people are thinking about practicalities. But the short answer to Aengus' question is that this hasn't really been addressed in any official way since the Good Friday Belfast Agreement. The terms of that agreement are pretty clear, but not precise. Firstly, calling a border poll is decided by the British Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, so that basically means the decision rests with the British Cabinet of the day. The exact text says, "The Secretary of State shall exercise the power under paragraph 1, that's the border poll, if at any time it appears likely to him that a majority of those voting would express a wish that Northern Ireland should cease to be part of the United Kingdom and form part of United Ireland." So the word shall there is doing a lot of work. In legal terms, it's a requirement. When someone is given discretion in law, the word used is may. When they have to do something, it's shall. But then the next clause says, if at any time it appears likely to him. Is that a get-out-of-jail card? Could Chris Heaton-Harris or his successor ignore a stack of opinion polls, stick his fingers in his ears and say, la, I'm not listening, it doesn't appear to me likely that the vote would pass? Maybe, but not really. Because it's the Secretary of State who makes the decision, not Chris Heaton-Harris. You might think that they're the same person, but not quite. When he's acting in his ministerial role, there is case law that basically means that decisions have to be rational and based on evidence. That doesn't mean he has to be right. The bar is higher than that, but there is a bar. And basically, if he was claiming something that was completely irrational, totally unsustainable given the evidence, it's possible that he could be overruled by a court. But in the real world, if there was enough evidence to take a court case forcing a border poll, then there would be other things going on at the same time. You can be sure that there would be intense campaigning on all sides and on both sides of the border. the Irish government would be likely to have an opinion on the British flouting of the 1998 agreement. So would the EU, and no doubt the Americans, who probably have more clout. A situation where the British were seen to be defeating democracy by chicanery would be likely to fire up a reunification campaign much more than ever. So the reality is that resistance from the British government could delay the poll for a couple of years perhaps, but that would not be anything like a resolution. I'm not going to talk about how a campaign for reunification might be won. That's a different podcast. But let's say it is. Firstly, note that the GFA allows a vote between being part of the UK and being part of the Republic. There's no third option. I know that Brexit headbangers in the Tory party like Steve Baker has said that there should be a higher threshold to change the status quo, like 60-40 vote. Firstly, that's crazy. Secondly, that's completely crazy. Having, let's say, a 59% vote in the north for joining the Republic, but 41% of voters can overrule that majority, that would be a recipe for disaster. The loyalist activist, Jamie Bryson, has said on this podcast that it should require a vote of the entire UK, that is to say the north plus the whole of Britain, voting on the reunification of Ireland. The fact is that that isn't what's written into the legally binding UN-registered international treaty, that is the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. So, supposing the vote goes through, what happens then? First of all, I would expect things to happen quickly, because it's then in the interest of everyone who has influence to make them happen quickly. When the end outcome is certain, the British will have no incentive to drag their heels and every incentive to get out as fast as possible, particularly because their political capital in the north will dwindle fast. They can't incentivize anyone to do anything with promises or threats that they won't be around to make good on. International partners will want a return to stability, and that means reaching the end stage as soon as possible. That leaves us, the Republic, and our government. We might be the least anxious to get a move on. Or not, depending on who's in power. But there will be an unending barrage of details to sort out. Everything from telephone codes to leaving cert points to speed limits to electricity voltage to seats in the new Dole to post offices to broadcast media to what sort of Tato crisps we get, and a million more. There is a real danger here that we end up with a Brexit-style situation where all of a sudden the dog that has been chasing the bus for more than a century suddenly catches it and only then thinks, what now? What now indeed? That would be a good thing to have worked on in advance.
And my second question is, there will be elements within unionism and loyalism who will just refuse. They won't go. They're going to probably take up an armed struggle against it. So how does the Republic intend to deal with that? Like, is that something that the Irish Army, the Irish military will have to deal with? In which case they are very underfunded and understaffed, as far as I can tell. Or because it will in effect be a domestic matter, will that be a job for the Gardaí? In which case, they're not armed. They don't seem equipped for an armed struggle. So what would the plan be there? How will we deal with these people? And it would be very interesting to hear if this has been thought about.
Yes, and I think it's not being thought about enough. I mean, thought about in the speed limits and telephone codes sort of way, not in the wolf tone songs in a pub sort of way. And Aengus identifies security as one big issue, which it is, but I think that it might be not as big of a problem as people fear if we do things right. First of all, the police in the north would have to be retained. That's no big surprise. The PSNI is just one of the many regional forces in the UK, as they would see it. Ireland had two police forces before independence, the RIC, which shrank to the RUC, and the DMP, the Dublin Metropolitan Police, which formed the basis for the Garda Síochána. It's notable that the RIC was armed and the DMP was not, so that's a precedent there already. But what is really important is the situation at the moment, now. Firstly, I would say that we shouldn't overestimate the degree or size of unionist rejection of a democratic vote. Taking the most recent general elections, unionists got just 11.2% of an All-Ireland vote. I'm not sure about his source, but David McWilliams has said that there would be as many Polish people as unionists in a united Ireland. And remember, despite decades of sometimes ferocious discrimination, only a small minority of Northern nationalists, ever voted for Sinn Féin before the ceasefires. Most people just want a quiet life, and unionists are no different. If we did a good job of making sure that unionists' rights would be respected and making sure that they knew it, then I think most of them would accept a democratic vote even if it wasn't their first choice. But you're right, there would likely be a number of unionists or loyalists who would reject the authority of the state and do so violently. The first thing that we should acknowledge here is that we have no control over that fact. We only control how we react. And it's worth thinking of the outcome of taking the other path, refusing to honour the democratic vote of up to 59% of the population, for example. I'm not a security expert, but 3 good strategies jump out at me. The first strategy is that sensitivity matters. The PSNI, who are familiar with and familiar to the people in the north, they should be used to police loyalist areas, particularly where there's any suggestion of resistance. That would be a PSNI answerable to a United Ireland government, but that would at least avoid needlessly stoking tensions. If any Gardaí were needed in any areas of the north for security reasons, it would make sense to bring them into nationalist areas to free up PSNI members to look after perhaps more loyalist areas. The second strategy comes from Germany, with some adaptations. The Red Army faction, the RAF, the other RAF, was a far-left terrorist group founded in West Germany in 1970. They were given aid secretly by the communist East German government with the aim of destabilising their Cold War rival, and the RAF carried out many bombings, kidnappings and assassinations. Obviously, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, they had no support from the communist East and not much reason to exist. But they kept on carrying out attacks, including a car bombing that killed the Deutsche Bank head Alfred Herrhausen just a few weeks after the wall fell in 1989, and the 1991 member of the SPD, the centre-left politician Detlev Karsten Rohwedder, who was responsible for distributing property seized by the communists in the former East Germany. The following year, the German government did a study that concluded that most of the Red Army attacks were motivated by a loyalty to and a wish for the freedom of many of its imprisoned members. They publicly announced that the prisoners' freedom would depend on an end of violent attacks by the RAF. It worked. They released a statement in 1993 saying, "Almost 28 years ago, during a liberation operation, the RAF was formed. Today, we end this project. The urban guerrilla in the form of the RAF is history now." The Red Army faction gave up the ghost. How to apply that in the north? Well, the second strategy I would apply to all terrorist groups, whatever their colour. I would sharply increase the penalties for membership, but base that on conviction for other crimes. So if you're caught with a gun or a bomb, you get convicted, you're sentenced to 5 years or whatever, you must serve that. But if you're convicted of membership of a terrorist organisation in parallel, you get 30 years added to that sentence consecutively. However, that sentence is lifted, the prisoner is released, if their organisation is judged by a security analysis to be wound up or entirely inactive. If it starts up again, those sentences are reactivated. And the third strategy, the true Republican strategy, is to make sure nobody has a motivation to reject their homeland. Compared to other countries, our problems are few, but that's no reason not to make them fewer. Make sure that everyone can own a decent home at a reasonable price. Make sure that every child gets a quality education. Provide the best in healthcare, free at the point of use. Make sure everyone can train for and get a good job. Have quality integrated transport system. All this sounds aspirational, but really it's mostly just standing up to vested interests. I would hope that the need to make a united Ireland work would give the impetus for governments to sweep aside those barriers. After all, very few people indeed are motivated to fight against living in a country where their children can grow up in security and in prosperity and in peace. And talking of Brexit headbangers, in a moment we'll have the interview, but first I want to say thanks to all of the patrons on Patreon. I really appreciate everyone who does that. We don't get a huge amount of money out of it. We're not in the same league as some other Irish podcasters, but I don't complain about that. It pays for things like web hosting, and Kevin and myself basically donate our time for free. It's also a great morale booster when we get a new patron. It lets us know that there are people out there who appreciate the podcast, or at least who are listening. We make a big effort to cover things that are undercovered in the Irish media. You're more than welcome to listen for free, but if you think you could manage to do the same as the other donors and throw in the price of a packet of Tayto crisps once or twice a month, there's details how to do that on the website and at the end of the show.
Do you agree? Do you disagree? Follow at Here's How Podcast on Twitter and like Here's How on Facebook for updates on each show's contents.
On the line, I have David Maddox. He is the political editor of Express Online, which is part of the Express newspapers group based in the UK with the Daily Express and the Sunday Express. And David, thank you very much for coming on. I'm sure we differ in political views. People in Ireland, I think, can read the Daily Express. It is sold in Ireland, but it's, I think, not very widespreadly bought in Ireland. And I've been looking through a lot of your work on that. And on this podcast, I don't know if you know, we try to be civil and we try to listen carefully to people of other points of view, and I think that assists in coming to some sort of synthesis and understanding each other. But I'm finding it difficult to do that, and looking through a lot of the headlines for the articles that you've written, it's very difficult to open with any question other than, are you completely insane? Are you?
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, one thing I've learned over 24 years almost now in journalism, is that people have widely differing views on the same topics, and come from it actually from very sane perspectives, but different contexts. And I think we all need to understand that of one another. Unfortunately, I have to say, I think one of the downsides of the Brexit experience in the UK and actually across the EU.
Oh, I can't wait to hear this. I can't wait to hear this. Tell me, please.
It is. I think both sides of the debate lost perspective, and in fact, we sometimes refer to the Brexit effect on individuals going apparently insane, as you so nicely put it, and losing a kind of rationality of their arguments. But it's my view of it is, I've changed my view on Brexit over or on the European Union over the years. Is that the two perspectives both have solid foundations to them, but really are different choices about which way you go forward.
Okay. One thing that I think, and I think Ireland generally respects, is that Britain as a country is a different country and is entitled to make its own decisions. And, we can have views privately or publicly as to the wisdom of those, but we don't have the right to interfere with that. And that's, I think, should be true of all international relations. And people, in different countries have different values and so forth. But you talked about people's views, people's attitudes and so forth. And as you're right, it is important to understand that people, to respect that people will have different views. It's very difficult to do that if people are working with different facts. And to me, that's the difficulty. And I'm looking at, and the reason I was motivated to get in touch with you was an article that's on your name here, and the headline on it is, Donald Tusk has given Keir Starmer a master plan to destroy Britain and hand it to the EU. And that really makes me think you're insane.
No,
that's not that's not a claim of a view. That's not an opinion claim. That's not an assertion of an attitude. That's a fact claim. That is fantasy.
That was an analysis piece, and I think there's a lot of grounds to it. Keir Starmer wants to take us back closer to the European Union. He clearly wants to take us back in. He won't admit to that fact, but
as do the majority of people in Britain.
No, I'm not sure about that. The last time we checked, the majority voted leave, but, it's very, very different perspectives on that. But Keir Starmer clearly wants to take us back in. And what is going on in Poland, I think, is deeply worrying. I've got friends in the media in Poland who are deeply worried.
Worried about what exactly?
Well, essentially the closing down of the state media there, because there were some challenging voices. I mean, if a Conservative government actually closed down the BBC in this country, some of us might cheer, but I think there would be an international outcry.
Some people in the Express might cheer the BBC being closed down, if only for wiping out a competitor. Although Boris Johnson did put in charge of it somebody he had some dodgy financial dealings with it. And I noticed you weren't quite as concerned with the previous government in Poland sacking whole swathes of judges in the courts who didn't agree with them. The clear claim here is, and you say you're right, this is an analysis piece, but it contains fact claims. And the basic fact claim is that Donald Tusk has given Keir Starmer a master plan to destroy Britain. That's insanity.
No, it's not at all. What Donald Tusk did is first, as soon as he got his rather shaky coalition together, which was basically promoted and supported by the Brussels establishment, was he rushed back to Brussels, where, of course, he had his old job, and found out what they wanted him to do.
Who are they?
To undo.
Who are they?
The European Commission and so forth.
Yeah, the European Commission. The European Commission is appointed by heads of states.
Let me finish.
I will let you finish, David, but I will not let you away. I will let you finish. I will not let you away with vague theys who you ascribe all sorts of motives to.
I'm happy to clarify.
Okay.
The Brussels establishment is the European Commission. To a certain degree, the European Parliament, although their power is more questionable, and to a certain extent the European Council. But what he did was he then unpicked the sovereignty of that country, which is essentially what the election was
unpicked
about.
The sovereignty of which country?
Of Poland, because we're talking about Poland, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the reality of it. So
how exactly did Donald Tusk, who was elected the Prime Minister of Poland, unpick the democracy of Poland?
Well, he has reversed the previous government's protection of domestic law, which of course is one of the central arguments of Brexit, and thank God we left. And there's been a argument for the Eastern European countries. Now, you may not like their policies on certain areas. I have questions about their policies on certain areas as well. But nevertheless, they were protecting the sovereignty of their countries against a bullying Brussels
Oh,
establishment.
well, hold on for a second. Hold on for a second. No. Hold on a second, because facts are important here, David. Facts are important, and I don't want to skip over them. So, first of all, the people of Poland are entitled to vote for a new government which has different policies to the previous one, and for that government to enact those new policies. I'm not entirely sure how that's undemocratic. But the previous issue was that a party which had previously been in power had so corrupted the judicial system that the Irish Supreme Court, when asked to extradite a suspect from Ireland to Poland, refused that extradition on the grounds that so undermined had the judicial system in Poland become that the prospective person being extradited could not expect a fair trial. That is an extraordinary thing to happen. The Irish Supreme Court is remarkably independent and typically is highly cooperative with European law and the various countries in the EU. So for that to happen, that is highly significant. And it is entirely within the rights of the Polish people to vote for a new government which reverses the policy, particularly those policies. And I think what you're referring to is that party, as well as stacking the judicial system, they were stacking state-owned media with sympathetic people. And the current government in Poland is reversing that. You or I may not like that, or we may, but that's entirely within their rights, isn't it?
I'm always very reluctant to support governments of any colour interfering with media, whether it's state-owned or privately owned. Some of the things I've been getting from colleagues, and I apologise for not being specific about this because I don't want to get people into trouble, it has been discussing the impact on private media as well in Poland.
Hold on for a second. That's not a story that I have seen published anywhere.
No, but that's because I know people who work over there, so it's that's the sort of some of the messages I've had. But I can't comment at all on the Irish Supreme Court. I don't know how its standing is. I didn't know about that story you told me about. So just
were you entirely unaware of the previous government in Poland sacking swathes of judges for politically motivated reasons?
Well, politically motivated is, of course, your interpretation.
No, it's not, because they explicitly said so.
Well, I mean, it's still your interpretation. They were protecting domestic law, and that was their policy. Their
stated policy was to remove judges that were politically unsympathetic to them.
I was aware of that, yes, but nevertheless, their political intention was to protect their sovereignty.
David, I don't want to get too. Go ahead, then I will comment.
It's no good you interrupting me.
Go ahead, then.
I try to answer you. Fair enough. I mean, I've come on your show to give you other point of view.
Sure,
it's fine,
go ahead, then. Go ahead.
Their political intention was to protect the sovereignty of their country. Now, you may disagree with that. I know Ireland is very pro-EU. We found that out during the Brexit discussions. But nevertheless, that was there, and I think they were within their rights as a government to do that. Now, certainly the Irish Supreme Court may have taken a different view on that. That's up to the Irish Supreme Court. That's up to its use of precedent and understanding of international situation. I don't always agree with court rulings. If you've read my stuff on the Rwanda stuff and the British Supreme Court, then I think that courts are as accountable in their own way as politicians should be. Or I think they should be held accountable in their own way. And where we disagree, we should have a right to say so. I don't know. I cannot comment on a case I don't know anything about. But getting back to the earlier point, I mean, if we look at the election result, Tusk put together a fairly shaky coalition. Okay, backed coalition.
I'm just going to challenge. No. I'm going to. No, I did allow you to go previously, but I'm just going to challenge one piece of vocabulary there, which is I think would generate about 1 million hits on Google from the Express website. Shaky coalition. What you mean is that the electoral system that every other country, pretty much in the world, with very few exceptions, has, other than Britain, which is that the and the United States, of course, that the Parliament largely reflects the Parliament largely reflects the votes of the people. Britain has a rather unusual, just allow me to finish. Britain has a rather unusual electoral system amongst world democracies in that very rarely happens. And you are very much trying to say they're all out of step except my Johnny. Yes, pretty much every country in Europe has coalition governments other than Britain.
I'm quite happy to explain my use of coalitions themselves are the norm. In this case, though, it was a coalition specifically put together of differing parties with one sole thing in common, which was to remove the previous
to win the election,
which
is the goal of every coalition.
No, because they're anti the previous government party was for one thing that linked them all. So
that's a coalition.
I may be proven wrong that it's shaky in the sense that it does manage to last a course of years. I would be surprised if a coalition built on such a slender one issue does survive. We've seen it before. We've seen it tried in Hungary. Again, another EU-backed coalition of.
What's an EU-backed coalition? What's an EU-backed coalition?
Well, when the president of the European Commission intervenes in the election and tells people to vote one way, then that's an EU-backed coalition.
Politicians have political views.
We see that in Italy as well, when von der Leyen did exactly the same. This is.
Yes, I think we have established that politicians have political views. But
the interesting thing is that she is not a politician anymore. She used to be a politician. She is now a bureaucrat for the European Union.
That's the vocabulary you use, but the bottom line is she's a political leader.
Elected. She wasn't elected, was she?
Well, in exactly the same sense that Rishi Sunak was not elected. Yes, that's correct. There's a political process to fill the job.
Rishi Sunak is leader of the party, but won the last
and again not elected, to that. But that's a whole different story.
We don't have prime ministers directly elected.
Indeed, we don't have leaders of the European Commission directly elected. There are various things, and people can have views of that. But to say that by definition, what she says.
There was no election that created the European Commission. She was appointed. She's an appointed bureaucrat.
And so she is elected in exactly the same sense that Rishi Sunak is.
The Conservative Party, no, not at all. Not at all. The Conservative Party was the elected governing party of Great Britain.
Yes, and they did not elect Rishi Sunak.
We have a party system.
And the European, David, the governments of the European Union are the elected governments of that, and they appoint the European Commissioner. I don't particularly like that system, but I'm not deluded about it.
You describe me as insane. If your suggestion that Ursula von der Leyen has any democratic basis at all to her position is totally insane.
I would agree with David. Let's agree on something. I completely agree with you that the democratic accountability and the access of the electorate to unseat someone like that, I completely agree with you that is inadequate.
Sunak will have to hold an election this year, and the likelihood is that the voters will kick him out. Voters will not have a chance to kick out Ursula von der Leyen if she decides she's going to do another 4 years or 5 years.
In fact, you're wrong. They will have the chance to kick out Rishi Sunak's MPs. The prospect of Rishi Sunak losing his seat is exceptionally slim.
But he won't be Prime Minister. He won't be Prime Minister.
That's correct.
If Labour win the election, he won't be Prime Minister.
That is correct.
That's how a parliamentary system works.
That is correct. And I don't want to get too deeply bogged into that, because I want to look at the principles of this. And one of the stories that is on your website at the moment, and the byline on it is by Express Reporter. It's a bit curious. We'll come back to that maybe. It says, map shows incredible new transport routes planned across Europe, but UK misses out. The UK is omitted from a major trans-European transport project poised for approval by the EU Commission. I'm wondering exactly why you think that's worth a news story.
I have to apologise on that. I had nothing to do with that story.
I appreciate that. But
I hadn't even read it. If you told me about it before, I'd have checked it out before.
That's fine.
I can't. I obviously wouldn't expect me to have a go at a colleague. And
no, I will not. No, but that's not my issue. Allow me to finish the question, David. Listen to the question before you answer. Allow me to finish the question, because very curiously, if you go to the Wayback Machine, this Internet Archive that can get past versions of websites that have since been changed, and I won't ask you to speak against your colleague Tim McNulty, because for a short time that story was attributed to Tim McNulty, and then a couple of days later, or perhaps even the same day, his name was taken off it and it was changed to by Express Reporter. And the headline was changed as well. Scheming EU countries leave UK out of landmark transport plans as map reveals betrayal, was the headline.
We have honestly, we have a lot of different editors doing a lot of different changes. I have no idea what happened with that story, or even why it went up, or the reasoning behind it. I haven't even read it, so I can't really say anything on it. I'm sorry.
I appreciate that, but I will happy to talk about it in the general sense. I've sent you a link to it there because we're connected on Zoom. There is a general sense in the Express of a grievance culture and a victim culture, and even with the current edition of that story, that is exactly my interpretation. That is exactly my interpretation. You're correct. Allow me to finish, David. Allow the question. And that is one example of it. And it is particularly insane because it says, I was going to say it implies, it doesn't imply, it straight up says that the EU leaving Britain out of a major trans-European transport project is a scheming betrayal. There's a lot of talk, not least in the Express, about left-wing snowflakes who trade on being victims and grievance culture. Are you sure that that's not the type of accusation that's actually an admission?
No, I don't see your logic at all. I mean, most of our stuff is being positive about Brexit and positive about Britain going forward.
Really? I haven't seen I've been looking through your stories and I haven't seen one positive. Everyone is negative.
No, not at all. Well, allow me to send you a whole batch of them when we finish this.
No, I'm looking through your thing. No, they are positive about Brexit in the sense that they are pro-Brexit, but they're all negative stories.
No, we're positive about. I've done stuff on trade deals. In fact, I'm literally taking a break from writing a story so I can join you now on how Britain is becoming, according to a new report, a more competitive, or the most competitive manufacturing global hub, thanks to Brexit. So, that is a positive story. That's one I'm literally working on as we speak. Obviously, not quite, because I've taken a break from typing.
Understood. I appreciate that.
But it's I've done lots of those sorts of stories personally. I know my colleagues have as well. Tim's not part of the politics team. I'm not entirely sure where that story came from. I would, as I said to you, I don't know its background, so I can't really comment on it at all. But
I'm not asking you to comment on it.
And yes, we do some what might be termed as EU bashing stories, and that is largely because we take the view, and our readers take the view, and that the EU is a negative organisation. This is why we supported Brexit. We think that it undermines democracy.
That's completely legitimate.
It was bad. We think that it was bad for the British democracy. It was bad for British democracy, but it was bad for the British economy. for us. I mean, I know there are arguments the other way, and I understand them, but that is the perspective we take. We don't like, and it gets back to our earlier discussion on Ursula von der Leyen and her role. We do not like the power of the European Union Commission, and I know, I regularly speak to senior people in other governments in Europe who are still there and don't want to leave, but are equally concerned, mainly the Eastern European countries, but not entirely. So, this is not a just one-off point of view. Now, yes, okay, as it happens, of course, Britain has just rejoined. Is it the Horizon Project? I think it is, isn't it, or something like that? The science thing. Now, there's actually a debate over that. Rishi Sunak is kind of heralding it as a great success. Some of us think actually that we're giving away our data and our scientific research for nothing, so there is still a debate.
What's the David? As you see it, what's the general view among scientists on that in Britain? British scientists?
Well, among British scientists, to be fair, I would say, and this is why we haven't gone hard on it. We've taken a more nuanced view on the debate. The majority of British scientists, but not the entirety, are in favour of it. But then again,
the majority of British scientists are in favour of what?
Of rejoining Horizon. So that, and this is why we
roughly what sort of a majority would you say?
I haven't got the figure. I haven't got the figures.
The overwhelming majority of the scientific community was entirely against Brexit. Well, that is true, isn't it?
No, that's not true. That's not true. I mean, there was certainly a majority against it, but there was also a large group who were in favour of it. And, it's...
I'm happy to leave that comment. I'm happy to leave that comment there. I won't go any further into it.
I can only say that because I worked with them during the actual referendum when I was on a more junior role in the Express. But I mean...
Okay. But pause for a second, because I don't want to kind of argue the nitty-gritty of specific things. What I'm concerned with is the general trend, and to go specifically to one that is bylined by yourself, the headline is, Britain is being tricked into an EU army through flawed Brexit deal, says new report. Now, I'm not terribly interested in the facts of that report. What I'm interested in is the presentation that there exists some sort of amorphous conspiracy in Brussels that for some reason was entirely hostile to Britain.
Conspiracy.
And was a threat
There's
to
huge
Britain.
hostility to Britain.
No. That's not the point. That's not what I said, David. I said what is portrayed in the Express is that there is a huge monolithic, amorphous view in the Brussels bureaucrats that are out to do Britain in, or to have hostility to Britain. And I think that the basic requirement for any sane dealing with this is that no organisation and no country that you're dealing with is a monolith, and that people have differing views, but mostly they are self-serving. And this creation of an imaginary other that is hugely threatening and that is determinedly hostile, that's a really bad thing for society, isn't it?
I'm not quite sure the point you're driving at, to be honest. I mean,
the creation of a mythical hostile other is dangerous.
I think, and I think there's a great deal. I mean, we haven't got really time to probably go through all of it, but I think that the decision by the British people to leave the European
Union... Yeah, but we don't have a dog in that fight. You're not talking to British people, talking to Irish people.
No. Sorry, I'm just.
Yeah, go ahead.
But this is why I think that the Brussels establishment, as I termed them before, but you could call them something else, is hostile to Britain because of that vote and because of what followed. We saw plenty of examples of that in the negotiations. Afterwards, we've seen plenty following it as well. And
hold on. Aren't you just obsessed, self-obsessed?
No, we're not at all.
David,
No, we're not.
You imagine your importance to be vastly more than it is, and you imagine that people in Brussels
are for a British audience.
Yes, and surely it would be relevant for that British audience for them to understand that their importance to either national politicians or European politicians in Brussels is actually pretty low.
So you quoted a story there at the start of this section on the EU army. So the fact of it is that there are two significant military structures two significant militaries in Europe: France and Britain. That's a fact of it. Is for there to be an EU military to go forward, you would need France and Britain's involvement. That's the truth of it. It is the stated aim of Ursula von der Leyen and others, but specifically Ursula von der Leyen, who was previously German defence minister and a terrible one at that, to have an EU army, as we term it, but essentially an EU military structure. And what is going on there is this thing called PESCO, and I haven't got I'm trying to remember what PESCO stands for.
It's European Military Cooperation.
Permanent European Military Cooperation, essentially. Permanent being the operative word.
Yes.
PESCO is the foundation for an EU military. Let's call it an EU military because it's not just army. And
it isn't, because that doesn't exist.
It is, and already we're having EU military operations. Now, I know Ireland has an opt-out on that, which is very good for Ireland, and I'd say well done on that respect, because of your neutrality, constitutional neutrality, which is. But the fact is that there is a move towards a recreation of an EU military structure, a permanent EU military, and. Britain's already been persuaded to join part of PESCO, and effectively the door is open to join other parts of PESCO. Now, it's fair to question whether we want our military, having left the European Union for all the reasons we left, whether we want to sign over our military in the long term for...
sign over? Sign over? What's that?
Sign over our military in the long term to an EU structure.
By what structure? How does cooperation change to sign over?
No, it's not. If the aims of people like Ursula von der Leyen go ahead, PESCO turns into an EU army, EU navy, EU air force.
That's a very tenuous thing, but it still doesn't explain sign over. Sign over implies an asymmetrical handing over of authority,
yes.
whereby European countries would control British military in an asymmetrical way.
If there is an EU military and Britain joins it, then yes, that's what would happen, and it is fair to have that debate and have that discussion.
Isn't this just, David? Isn't this just all toddler level narcissism?
No.
Whereby, hold on for a second. No, I'm going to ask this question, and I'm not going to finish it. It strikes me as toddler level narcissism, whereby clearly in the EU, either with Britain in or out, there is a level of pooling of sovereignty where decisions are made at an EU level rather than at a nation state level. But it's an incredibly immature way of thinking to imagine that pooling of the sovereignty means Europeans taking us over. There is an entirely separate thing happening there where you have symmetrical cooperation, where people in any, be it military or in any other capacity, pool resources and make a joint decision. David, let me ask the question.
Yeah.
That is an entirely different thing than what you describe it as being country A taking over in an asymmetrical way Britain.
Well, it's not country A.
Or any particular country, or the EU. But deal with the question.
International bloc. Well, I have to say I completely disagree. This is what the Brexit debate in the end was about. It was about sovereignty, about control of your own destiny as a country. And, you may disagree with that. You may not like that. You may like to pool more and more sovereignty with a unelected, unaccountable organisation in Brussels. But that's the
no, David. Grammar is important here. You are pooling sovereignty with other democratic countries.
No, we're not. No, we're not.
I agree with you. I agree with you that the democratic control of the EU is inadequate. But you are not pooling sovereignty with the EU. You are pooling sovereignty with other countries.
No, you're not, and that's the problem. That's the problem, because we're seeing, and this comes back to the issue with Poland before. We are seeing the EU demand the EU Commission, let's be specific, demand greater control and greater say over the minutiae of domestic
what is the EU Commission?
Issues, domestic law. And it is, as I said previously in this discussion, unaccountable, unelected, and has no basis in democracy at all. It's closer to the Chinese Communist Party, frankly, than than a democratic Western country. So what we're seeing is, and yes, I agree, nation states who are part of the EU are allowing this to happen, and
they're choosing for it to happen. They're choosing for it to happen.
No, they're allowing it for it to happen, and most of them are not asking. I mean, Ireland, I know, is slightly different because it has held referendums, but most of them are not asking the permission of their voters. I get back to the point on the EU army. It is the stated aim of Ursula von der Leyen and others at the top of the EU to have an EU military, and for PESCO.
Are people not allowed to have political objectives?
No, I'm not saying. Of course, they're allowed to have a political objective.
So she has a political objective. I would not agree with it, but I don't agree with the objective, but I don't disagree with her right to pursue it.
But you seem to be objecting to us saying this political objective is a bad thing, and that this move.
David, I'm not. I'm making the distinction. David, I am making the distinction between. David, I'm making the distinction between disagreeing with her political objective and disagreeing with her right to have a political objective.
Well, I know. I don't disagree with her right to have it. I disagree with...
As every turn you say she's unelected, when she is elected to exactly the same degree as Rishi Sunak. But
No, she's not. No, she's not elected to the same degree as Rishi Sunak, because he is... we have a parliamentary party system, and he happens to be a leader now, in my view.
Unelected.
No. He was elected as an MP. He is elected... his party was elected to power in the last election. He will come again this year, as it happens, to be held accountable again with the party system, and he can be voted out as Prime Minister through his party losing the election. That can't happen to Ursula von der Leyen. There is no equivalence whatsoever. As it happens, I agree with you that there should have been an election when he became Prime Minister. But as it happened, and I've written a bit about that as well. So, although I'd like to see I haven't picked that up, but it's I think the psychology of British democracy has changed. That has made the Prime Minister more presidential in style. So I don't disagree with you that he should have gone for an election, but he certainly has more democratic mandate than Ursula von der Leyen does, and greater accountability.
Okay. The Daily Express has been around for more than 100 years.
Yeah.
Are you proud of everything it's done? What's the last thing that it's done that you would not be comfortable with?
I mean, when I joined the paper back in 2015, because I'd previously worked for the Scotsman and gone through the Scottish referendum, I was, I always, when I join a newspaper or a media outlet, I always look at it and decide whether I'm comfortable with working for it, and I've been comfortable with working for the Express. You can, I'm sure you could pull out some examples of where we may have gone wrong. The current editor. I mean, you have to remember that I joined under a different ownership group. The current editor.
I'm asking. I'm not trying to attack you, but I'm trying to kind of tease this out a bit. You will be aware that the Daily Express was a very enthusiastic supporter of Hitler prior to the start of World War II. I'm looking at.
Obviously, I wasn't even alive then.
Clearly, does probably know.
I mean, it was actually a very enthusiastic supporter of Churchill and his attempts to defeat Hitler as well. But Mayo was a much stronger supporter of Hitler.
I think it's reasonable to give the listeners just one small piece of information on that. The headline from 1933 was "Judea declares war on Germany. Jews of all the world unite in action." This was a headline in the Express, essentially following the Nazi Party line that there was a world Jewish conspiracy against Germany.
Right.
And I wouldn't suspect. And by the way, I wouldn't suspect anybody.
I can also say that we've done a great deal of work in recent years fighting anti-Semitism. We've supported Israel in its latest efforts against the
David, to be clear, I would not excuse David
Corbyn on anti-Semitism. So if you want to pull out something from a dim and distant
past,
no, I
don't.
Where some idiot editor went wrong, then that's
okay. So first of all, it's not some idiot editor went wrong. This was a very, very consistent editorial line, which came from the ownership as well as the journalistic team in the Daily Express in the 1930s. And I wouldn't accuse you or anybody else in the Express of holding those views now. And I don't want to make that very, very clear. And I am not drawing a parallel in those terms. But the parallel I do want to draw
we also
is allow me to finish. Sorry, go ahead.
Strongly supported church. No, we were also the paper that most strongly supported Churchill in taking on Hitler.
Yeah, that might not be as big.
That is true as well. So
yes, that is true,
true,
David. I'm not entirely sure that will help your cause as much as you will think with Irish listeners. But the particular aspect, aspect, David. Allow me to finish the question.
You talk about supporting Hitler. I mean, for crying out loud.
Yes. David, allow me. David, hear the question. What I'm concerned with is the aspect of that, not the anti-Semitic aspect of that, actually, or concerning as it is. But what I want to talk about is the imaginary monolithic enemy aspect of that. And clearly, in 1930, there were millions of Jewish people all over the world. They had as broad a range of political outlooks as you could possibly imagine. And the core damage of that lie, I think, was not the anti-Semitism. It was the promotion of the idea of a monolithic, obsessed enemy, obsessed with the supposed victim, in this case, Germany. To me, would you agree? No, David, my question is, would you agree that is a dangerous political message to send?
Well, I mean, it always depends on context. I mean, I certainly would say that in terms of talking about a Jewish conspiracy. Obviously, that's but it depends on context. And that's because you've used that in terms of the European Union as well. Are you equating?
Yeah, I am. I think.
No. Hold on. You just give me a long question.
Yeah, but I've asked. It's a yes or no question, so you can answer at length, but start with a yes or a no.
You're equating. Well, I just said it's all on context.
I didn't equate anything.
You're equating criticism of the European Union with
I'm not.
Mass anti-Semitism.
No, I'm not.
Well, that's basically what you've just done.
No, it's not what I said. I can tell you what I said if you want, but I didn't say that.
And honestly, you can take any media brand in Britain or essentially around the world and find examples of what you're talking about.
That's possibly true, but my question is, do you think that is a dangerous political message to send?
It depends on context.
So in some cases, it's a good idea to promote the idea of a mythical, monolithic enemy.
Well, I mean, it depends whether you think it's mythical or not. So, yes, certainly.
Yeah, and this is where I get to the absolute immaturity of the idea that the whole of Europe is somehow obsessed with victimizing Britain. The thing that you should really be concerned about is they don't care.
We're not suggesting that the whole of Europe is obsessed with victimising Britain. And as I say,
that's not borne out by your headlines.
Well, it's shorthand. I mean, if you've written a headline, you'll know that you have to use shorthand because you have essentially a limited number of characters. But that's the realities of journalism, I'm afraid. We can't go into.
No, but that doesn't require. That doesn't require lies.
So. Well, we're not lying.
Yeah, when you say that there is a monolithic, David, when you say that there is a monolithic entity that is obsessed with damaging and doing harm to Britain, that is nonsense.
That is your term. That is your term. What we have.
Well, what's yours? What's yours?
No. What we have talked about is, and it is in some ways understandable, is that the result of the referendum in 2016 has and
you imagine that people care.
No, we don't imagine people care. We have there is a issue with the European Union. It is natural. Now, when we talk about the EU army, I think there's fair questions to be asked.
It's a mythical army, to be clear.
You say it's mythical, but it's not.
Does it exist?
That's it is in the process of existing. It doesn't fully exist yet. No, but it doesn't mean
it doesn't exist at all, and may well never.
Except that there have been EU military operations, but
yes, but an EU army doesn't exist and may well never.
You can keep kidding yourself, but that is the intention, and we've seen it before. We've seen examples of, it will never happen, and then it does. So let's wait and see.
But deal with the core issue, David, that the promotion of the idea of a monolithic enemy obsessed with doing harm to whatever group of people is being addressed, that is a dangerous political message to send, isn't it? I'm
not quite sure where you're coming from.
Well, I'm looking at there is a whole history of rivalries. For good reasons, the Irish have had suspicions about Britain at various points over the years, over the centuries. Would that be a monolithic enemy? It's I will say touché. I think Irish people often wrongly imagine that Britain is the source of all of their ills when they should perhaps look internally. I agree that Ireland can make that mistake as well, but I think that relentlessly promoting that.
My point is that the nature of international discourse, the nature of political discourse, creates these sorts of things. You could see it within, for example, party political systems. If I'm going to get domestic, I know you don't like our party political system, but it's.
I don't have an opinion on it.
No, but the Conservatives and Labour will always essentially have that dichotomy, if you like, of blaming each other for everything.
But is promoting that a good idea
as well? Well, but it's just it's just part of normal discourse. You may not like it. I'm just saying. You may not like it, but that's the reality of it.
Okay, but perfectly normal decisions, such as the EU making transport network plans, being presented in the light that it is a scheming betrayal because Britain, which is not a member of the EU, is not included. That does signal a victim mentality and the imagination that there is some large monolithic group out there that's out to get you. And that is a very psychologically unhealthy place to be in.
As I say, I can't talk about that story. I have no idea about that story at all. It's you've literally just...
David, I could give you 100 stories like that.
we have a difficult relationship with the EU. The Ukraine war.
You don't. It is entirely one-sided. The one thing that you could communicate to your readers, is that most people and most politicians on the continent just don't care.
Well, maybe they don't, and that's fine. But I mean, certainly people in Brussels do.
No, you're imagining it.
Well, you say that. Have you been over there recently?
I've talked to quite a number of politicians who've worked in Brussels.
And I talk to think tanks and things over there as well. I do it on a weekly basis.
And they may be good enough when they talk to a British person like yourself. They may be good enough to talk to you about Britain, or they may talk they may talk about Britain critically to you. But to imagine that they are spending their days and nights scheming between each other about you is close to insanity.
But we're not saying that.
You are.
No, we're not.
I've got it here, literally saying the headline about the EU army, which I'd be entirely critical of, by the way, saying Britain is being tricked into an EU army through a flawed Brexit deal.
Yes.
You imagine that there's someone there in Britain, in Brussels, wanting to trick Britain, as though they could.
As I've explained to you, I think there are good reasons why, in that case, the EU want Britain to be part of an EU army, because along with France,
which would be a decision made by Britain.
Along with France, we're the only significant military power in Europe.
But that decision would be made by Britain.
In Western Europe. Well, it will be.
Yeah.
But it is. But the warnings. I mean, I'm not going to go into the full details.
No, I don't want to go into the details. I'm not interested in the issue. I'm interested in the point that Britain will make that decision.
The warnings were coming from politicians here who were concerned that the government was being pulled into making a decision that perhaps we shouldn't be making, and I think that's fair enough.
And David, I think that would be a great thing to report, and what you could report is that British politicians disagree with each other, and you could report the issue.
Essentially, we're getting over the you don't like the way we wrote the headline, which is,
I'm talking about a whole mass of
it. But that's the daily existence for most journalists, I'm afraid, is people complaining about the way we wrote the headline. Headlines are written to pull people into a story. You could like them or dislike them, but I think it's perfectly justified. In that case, I mean, I don't really see any problem with it.
David Maddox, political editor of express.co.uk, writes for the print newspaper as well. You have given the Irish listeners very clear set of your views. Thank you very much for that.
No problem.
Go to the website for sources and references from the show, and while you're there you can like the show on Facebook, follow the show on Twitter at Here's How Podcast, and follow David Maddox at David PB Maddox if your sanity can withstand that. And get in touch if you want to suggest a guest or a topic for a future show. Thanks again to all of the patrons on Patreon. That covers the cost of keeping the podcast going. And if you could throw in the price of a packet of Tayto crisps, or even the price of a 6-pack once or twice a month, please do go and sign up at patreon.com/here's how. That link is on the website. Also there you can find out how to subscribe to the podcast for free on your computer, on your phone, or by email. All that information is at www.here'show.ie. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. The co-producer is Kevin Wolf. Thank you for listening.